Hello there everybody, this is Krista and welcome back to Crochet Witch Tarot. And I had to get on this tag that I feel like has been resurfacing lately from, oh my gosh, Amidst the Grey, whose channel I really love. She put this tag out, gosh, I want to say maybe, it's at least a month. I remember seeing a few VRs early December, I want to say, and then it just totally got away from me, but I loved this idea when I saw it, and I loved her video on it. Anyway, I mean, you'll know what this is from the title, but this is the Coffee House Decks tag, and I've just been loving watching everyone's videos. They're so much fun. I just love seeing how everyone interprets the prompts, which I think is just the most fun part about any sort of VR, but I'm really excited to do this one, so let's just get started. So our first coffee we are approaching is the Espresso. And so the prompt for this is a deck that is bold, simple, to the point, and a bit punchy, which I can't say I've ever had pure espresso. I think I just know it would be, it's just too much for me. I cannot imagine myself on pure espresso. But when I thought about that prompt, I thought about what it just must be like to have straight espresso. The deck that came to mind was the Trionfi della Luna. This is the illustrated Pips edition in the original coloring. There's a couple different colorways out now, but this this deck really just tells it to me like it is, and I do think that is a common experience with really any of the Deviant Moon Patrick Valenza's decks that I've heard. But when it comes to his style of artwork, this just is the one for me. I love the characters. It feels like they are speaking directly to what I need to hear. I'm never sitting with a reading with this deck feeling like, oh, like I need to think about that, or like I need to pull some clarifying cards. It gives its message loud and clear. It does not hold anything back. It just really feels like that espresso shot of a deck, and I really enjoy using this one, especially when I want a reading on something where, you know, I want to be told exactly what I need to hear, and I kind of want that to happen quickly, I guess you could say. So any readings I do with this deck, like I said, they don't take me very long. I can pretty much pull the cards. I know exactly what they're trying to tell me, pretty much what they're trying to call me out on, and that's that on that. But the other thing I really like about this deck is that these characters just make me laugh as well. I just find them so endearing and strange, which I think is a really good base for a lot of reading. If, you know, you could see an espresso shot that way as well, is it really does act as a base for a lot of different coffee beverages, and I feel like that's what this tarot does for me as well. So that is my espresso deck, and that is the Trionfi della Luna illustrated Pips. Next up we have the drip coffee, which I took to kind of mean that, like, at home coffee brew, you can do it with a coffee machine. That's what I'm thinking it is. I do really like coffee. I do not know too much about it. I pretty much exclusively use, what do you even call it? A percolator, one of the coffee pots. So I don't know if this counts in that. I'm taking it to be that. Not that it even matters. Anyway, drip coffee. The prompt is a deck that is simple, accessible, and gets the job done. Now, that one for me, this is a newer one, so this really has just totally fit into that slot, and that is the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. Now, when I was thinking about simple and accessible, the goal was, for me, is it a nudity warning, I suppose? We're gonna just start on that devil card, sure. What I had in mind was really something that followed if not a clone, the RWS system very closely, since that is what I know best. So to me, that is simple, gets the job done. But thinking about accessibility as well, I wanted to find a deck that was, one, mass market, because I don't know, when I think accessible, I think, you know, readily available, easier for a lot of people to get for many different reasons. But then the other thing is that I wanted a deck that just comes with a really good guidebook, and I feel like this deck fits all of those categories to a T. And I also just really love the artwork, but the guidebook on this is really, really such a fantastic one, where it feels accessible in the way where if you are someone who either doesn't know tarot super well or just doesn't know the Smith-Waite system well, you could easily read with this deck using that guidebook. I think it really is such a fantastic one. And I love the direction the artist went with these cards. I really like how... what's the word? Oh my gosh. That must be like a drinking game at this point, me saying what's the word in all of my videos. Oh my gosh. Isn't that versatile? Jeez Louise. You know, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. But we really see a lot of just different kinds of people in this deck. What's that word? What's the word for that? Oh no. It's gone. It's just gone out of my brain. That's not a good one to lose. I think you're all picking up what I'm putting down, probably. But we see all different body shapes, skin tones, ability levels, and the gender identities. And so it also feels accessible in that way, where to me this seems like a deck where most people could use this and feel like they can connect with some of these characters in some way, which I really enjoy about it. Oh my gosh, it's gonna bug me that I can't think of that word. You know, someday it'll come back. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Anyway, that is my drip coffee deck, and that is the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. Our next prompt is the pour over coffee. So this is a deck that you really need to kind of sit and take your time with, but it is well worth that time you take. And for me right now, that is the Dark Goddess Tarot. Oh gosh, I really tied a knot in this. Okay, got it. Now, this is created by Ellen Lorenzi Prince, I want to say. This is the mass market edition. And the reason that, to me, this feels like that pour over coffee energy is because, well, I could read with this deck just like a classic Smith-Waite. Whenever I pull cards from this, I really want to spend time with these different goddess energies and learning more about their stories, which a lot of that is in the guidebook, which is fantastic. So this is one that I also feel like, again, although I can read with it out of the box technically, I want to spend some time with it. It does also change around a couple of the card names, which is really interesting. But I think the guidebook for this deck is fantastic. I've been learning a lot about goddesses that I just wouldn't have learned about otherwise. So whenever I do readings with this deck, it's one that I know, you know, I'm not just like pulling cards quickly and that's that. We're doing a reading, you know? I'm pulling out the guidebook, I'm reading all of the things for each of the cards, unless, you know, I get to a point, I suppose, where I know the deck that well. But given my memory, I assume this is going to be a process, and that's okay. But I really, really enjoyed spending time with this deck. I always feel like I get something really powerful from it. It does really hold on to that sort of divine mother goddess energy. Of course, it being the dark goddess tarot, but it really does feel like almost like a special occasion type of deck for me. And again, one that I really need to sit with. It's not a quick reader by any means of the imagination for me. So that is my pour over coffee deck, and that is the Dark Goddess Tarot. Next up, we've got the Cafe Latte. Whoa, I just said that, it's so weird. We have... I said Cafe Latte. Anyway, Cafe Latte. And I feel like anyone who is a coffee drinker, I'm going to generalize, but I think that's alright. Don't we all love a good latte? So, the prompt for this is a deck that is very well received and highly palatable, and immediately what came to mind for me is the Oak, Ash, and Thorn Tarot. Now, I feel like I've really not heard a bad review of this deck whatsoever. The only complaint I ever hear is just like how thick the deck is. This is my full size. I do have the pocket edition as well, which if the cardstock really doesn't work for you on the full size, I highly recommend getting that mini one because it is so easily shuffleable for me, and I can't really shuffle this one in any normal sort of way. So again, problem solved, I suppose, question mark? Anyway, other than that though, about the cardstock being thick, I don't think I have once heard a bad thing spoken about this deck because it really is just so palatable. Like when I think of that word, this is what comes to mind. The artwork is so gorgeous. It feels so inviting. The world that we get here really, it's welcoming, it's cozy, it's friendly. I don't know, it's a magical little world we're invited into. I mean, come on. How do you not love that? I feel like even for anyone who doesn't own the deck, especially if, you know, it's a choice to not own the deck, even people I've spoken to where that's the case, it's sort of like a thing of, well, it's just not for me, or like animal decks aren't for me, but still love it, you know? Like, still love to admire it. It's just one of those decks where I just feel like it is so widely loved, whether it's one you want to own or not. And whenever I read with this deck, it really does give me messages in a bit of a sweet kind of way. Not where it's hiding anything from me, but I just feel very... what's the word I'm looking for? See, there it is again. We say it again. It's such a cozy deck. That's really what I'm trying to say. So this really could fit into some of the other prompts we have coming up, but just in regard to that highly palatable and just so well received, this one really fits the bill for me because, again, it's one so many people have in love and for such great reason. So that is my Cafe Latte deck, and that is the Oak, Ash, and Thorn Tarot. Next, we have the Cappuccino, which I do think I've had one of these. I can't really now mentally think of the difference in regard to taste between that and a latte. I know there must be one. I think cappuccinos are definitely stronger. I think I liked them though. These are the questions. I don't know. But the prompt is a deck that is classic, sophisticated, and maybe a little bit fussy. And that, again, another one that immediately came to me what the answer was. That is the Terra Volatile. Now, me and this deck have had a bit of a back and forth, you could say. I do really appreciate it for what it is. It's classic in the sense that you really can, if you can read the Smith-Waite system, you can pick this deck up and read it just fine. but it is a bit... Whose videos are... Oh, I was just watching Lisa's video, and she described this category as like the pinky up. The pinky up deck, which immediately made me think of the SpongeBob episode, Breathing and Fine Dining. This is the pinky up, breathing and fine dining tarot for me. And it does feel a little bit like snooty to me. I think because while it does follow the Smith-Waite system, it is really filled with this very intense, to me again, occult symbolism and, oh gosh, I'm not even exactly sure how to put it into words. The artwork is so gorgeously done. It's just sometimes when I go to the guidebook with this deck, that's what I'll say. When I use the guidebook that's on their website alongside this deck, a lot of it feels like going a bit over my head. And again, by no fault of the creators at all whatsoever. It could entirely just be that I am not well versed on any sort of subject like that. So, of course it would go over my head. But I guess in each of these cards, sometimes when I'm trying to do a reading, this feels like one I should just be able to kind of pull some cards, know what it's saying. But when I go into that guidebook, I always am left with kind of like a what? What are you trying to say? What's happening here? So, it's one that I've especially, there is an extra suit that comes along with this deck called the Vessel suit, which is really, it is fascinating. But I had to end up pulling it out for myself because it just was too much. I couldn't really read easily with the deck, and I just did not end up having interest in really intensely learning that suit well so that I could. So I've kind of resigned to the fact that this is a deck that I like, but for now I really entirely read it without that guidebook and just focus on the pictures. But I guess for that reason, it feels fussy to me. Is this one that I think is necessarily going to stay in my collection long term? I'm not really sure. I'm not sure. I think if it did, it'd be almost from like a collector's standpoint, which I don't often do. But it's one of those that I also feel like it's going to have its time and place for me, and maybe that's just not right now. And again, another way it feels a bit fussy to me, but that is my Cappuccino deck, and that is the Terra Volatile. Next up is my personal favorite when it comes to coffee drinks anyway, and that is the Mocha. I love mochas so much. Anything chocolate really is gonna get me, but oh, there is just something so good about a mocha. That was my drink all through college. That's what would, if I am not a person who is late to anything. I refuse to be late. I'd rather be 20 minutes early. I hate being late. The only times I've ever consistently been late is college, when I needed to get, apparently, my mocha before I got to class. And if the line was long, like, we were waiting it out. So that's how you know, because usually nothing will stop me from being somewhere on time. But the prompt behind this one is a deck that is rich and indulgent and a bit extra. And for me, that is the La Flora Tarot. And I feel like, you know, when a deck has a seal like this that you don't want to break already, it's indulgent and a little bit extra. But I really do enjoy this deck. Reason number one why I picked it is because it's indulgent in terms of the price, at least for me. This was a spendy one. And I really do enjoy this imagery. It's not one that I ever expected myself to be interested in because it is this black and white deck, and I usually want color. But there is something about the way these florals are illustrated that just brings it to life for me. And there's so much, the richness in this deck comes in the guidebook where the creator really goes into why they picked each plant, how it relates to the tarot card. And so there's so much for me to learn in this deck, and it really hits a subject that I want to learn about. And so that tends to be the difference for me when it comes to guidebooks, where I realized for the last deck I was saying, like, I don't want to get into all that because there's so much info in there, where this one probably has the same amount of info. It's a subject I want to indulge in. So that's another place where that idea of indulgence comes in for me. But it definitely is a bit extra because, again, it really, really goes beyond just looking at the tarot and gives you information on the plant that, personally, if I'm looking at it, in order to, do your reading, there's probably at least 2 to 3 paragraphs in there that you don't have to read. You really don't. But if it interests you, it's so cool that it's there. So it's one of those where it really is like indulgent and rich and extra in that way. And there's something about this artwork that also feels kind of extra to me because you can tell that there's so much time that went into each of these images. And I don't know, again, it just, the whole process of getting the deck was indulgent, for me at least. The whole concept behind it. We're dealing with this character of La Flora, or Flora, who I think is a goddess, deity type figure. And so we're going on this journey with her throughout this deck, looking at all these plants, and it really is, it's so cool and so beautiful. So it really does feel like that indulgence of a Mocha to me. So that is my Mocha deck, and that is the La Flora Tarot. Our next prompt is the Cortada, which I don't know that I've ever seen one of those. But the idea behind this is a deck that is balanced and objective. And hands down for me, the one I always use for any kind of objective reading is the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot. And I'm not exactly sure why this one feels so unattached almost. But for me, it's like there's so much air energy in this deck. And I think that's why it feels so objective, because I am someone who heavily personifies my decks. So sometimes when I'm using certain decks, I really do feel like they're inserting their own voice into a reading. And almost as if they're giving their own thoughts. Where this deck, I don't sense anything of the sort from that. There is really a level of detachment with this one. And I think it's because the landscape is so airy and open. It leaves a lot of room for, like, a lot of breathing room almost. And so I think part of that is when I am looking for a balanced and objective reading, it's usually because I'm looking for advice on something that I personally might feel pretty emotionally charged about. And so part of this deck is that when I'm pulling cards from it, and even the whole experience of shuffling it, it forces me to kind of sit and breathe, and I don't know, it almost feels like it declutters my own mental space in a way. And I do also really enjoy the pippish nature of this deck. I think that also really adds to its objectiveness. It just feels like the image I get in my head when I think of this deck is almost just like this really clear glass of water. Like, it's refreshing in that kind of way. And when I want an objective reading, that's really what I'm seeking. Is something that can just provide a little bit of relief, some fresh air, and advice that just doesn't feel tainted by any sort of opinion, really. So I do love this deck for that purpose. So that is my Cortada deck, and that is the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot. Next up, we have the Compana, I think is what that is. I know I have never seen or heard of this drink before, so no tidbit from me to be had. But the prompt here is I can't read my own writing. A deck that, oh, here we go. A deck that puts you in your place, but with a bit of sweetness. And again, I didn't even have to sit and think about this one. No multiple choices to be had here, because it was definitely my Mons Tarot. I don't know what it is about this little deck that just calls me out. Like, so seriously calls me out. But, I mean, you can't deny the obvious touch of sweetness here, because you can't be mad at these little monsters. They're so cute. Everything in here is so cute. So, it's one that I use when it also feels a bit on the objective side, not totally, because I feel like their personalities really do come through in readings, but it feels a bit on that objective side, so I like using it for readings where I kind of know, I know I need to be told that I did something a little not so great in that situation, or maybe it wasn't me, but I'm making excuses for someone else. You know those kinds of things that happen. So this is a deck I really love to go to for that reason, because every single time without fail, it's gonna tell me, if we're looking at that first example, it's gonna come right out and say, yeah, you did kind of goof there. Here's why, and here's how you're gonna have to fix it. It just really, really tells it like it is. But does have this, as brutal as it can be to me, it's got this comforting feeling purely because the images are so colorful and cute. And that's just what it comes down to for this deck. I love this one. I use it all the time. It just really is a fantastic advice giver when I don't want to be comforted very much, I don't need that in whatever situation I'm trying to read about. I just want to be told like it is, but while I'm doing it, I might as well look at something that's cute and colorful. So that is my Compana deck, and that is the Mons Tarot. Next up, we've got the chai latte, and I may have lied about the mocha. This might be my favorite, but that's an as of late kind of thing. As I have just been less tolerant of coffee, apparently. I don't know where that came in to my life, but that's the case, so it is what it is. But the chai latte is a deck that is warm, cozy, and nurturing, and for me, one of those decks is really my herb crafters. There's just something about this one. This is a deck that feels very grandmotherly to me, almost. Whenever I read with this deck, I feel like I'm sitting in the kitchen of, I don't know who, an older woman. It always just feels like an older woman, and maybe it's a friend or a grandmother, but either way, it just feels like I was invited over to tea by this older woman who's a really cool herbalist, and she's just like telling her life story and giving advice through stories, and that's what this deck really feels like to me. It's got this really amazing combination of just that kind of cozy feeling, but nurturing in a way where I leave these readings with so much really great advice and like solid activities that I can do, which is another like really great aspect of this deck. So whether it's I pull one card and say I pulled the Eight of Fire. So for my day, I want to find a way to incorporate ginger, and in the guidebook, it does give you a couple ways to do that, or I can kind of go my own direction with it. It's just a really, really just fantastic deck. It always makes me feel cozy when I use it. there's just some kind of energy to it that again feels like that really down to earth crone-like energy that I really enjoy to seek out pretty often. I just love this deck for that. So that is my chai latte deck, and not to mention how many like different spices is in a chai latte, so it feels appropriate for that as well. But that is the Herb Crafters Tarot. Next we've got the Matcha Latte, which also love those. I forget about them though. But that is a deck that is more of an acquired taste and or unconventional. And I just know, for me, that one is the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. Now this is the pocket edition. I do have the guidebook from the full size. But I loved the feel, the look and feel of this pocket one. So that's what we're using. But this is a deck that really does go on its entirely own system. So I really could not read this right out of the box, at least without the guidebook. And even so, looking at that full-size guidebook, I had a lot of moments of like, what? What are we saying here? What's going on? And so it's just not one that I grasped super easily right away, and still really haven't. This is one that I've kind of, it's been simmering for a while in my collection. I'm just waiting for kind of the right time, which I do think is starting to come up now, since discovering, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of the person who showed me on Instagram, that it pairs really, really well with the Fairy Temple Oracle, which is one of my absolute favorite oracles. So I've been doing the keyword readings that Dawn Michelle showed on her channel, where you pull an oracle that gives you, 2 to 3 keywords on the bottom. That tends to happen with like the Rock Pool oracles and the Blue Angel oracles, which this one is. And you pull cards for each of those keywords. So I've been doing that with the Fairy Temple and this deck, and that's been making it more digestible for me. But I really do think this one is an acquired taste, and it really has been that way for me, because I knew I loved the artwork. At first I did not. When I saw it the first time a couple years ago, I was just like, absolutely no way, that's not for me. And then it grew on me. So I got it, and now I've had it for a long time, and it's just still one I don't know well, and I'm just kind of dipping my toes into getting to know it, since I've discovered this way to do so that makes sense for me. But it's another one of those that the people who love it, love it. It's one of those where it's like never gonna leave their collection, like they really do amazing work with it. But I feel like I need to build up to that with this deck. If that's a place it's meant to go, maybe not. But I do have a feeling about it where I do think we're going to do some really great work together. It's a slow journey for me and the Dreams of Gaia Tarot, which is completely okay. And also kind of cool, because Matcha does have this really earthy taste to it. Which I feel like this deck also has this like interesting earthy kind of feel in its own unique way, truly. So that is my Matcha Latte deck, and that is the Dreams of Gaia Tarot. Next we have the Hot Chocolate, which is a deck that speaks to a younger version of yourself. You're gonna have to hear me out with this one. I quite literally just got this afternoon. I went to my local metaphysical store and they had it on clearance. And so this is not really going to be a conventional look at like an inner child deck. Oh my gosh, words today. But getting this deck this afternoon is really what spurred me to also finally film this video, because I was like, oh my gosh, that is my inner child. Anyway, I should show the deck. It is the Golden Tarot of the Renaissance. Now, I realize this does not look like an inner child deck, but small child me had a real intense interest in medieval history. Like, truly very intense. I loved everything about it. There was a book series that I read. Oh my gosh, I didn't look it up. Oh no. I always forget. So, there's a book series for children that is these fictional historical diaries. The original ones of them were called the Dear America. But there's a different, like, offshoot of that makes me think of this. I'm gonna look it up, and I will return, because it feels important. Okay, I found it. So there is the Dear America diaries, of which I read all of those. But the ones that were my favorite were the Royal Diaries, and they looked like this. I'm gonna show. This was, I just remember it being my favorite one. This was the Elizabeth I one. They were magical. Again, they were these fictionalized diaries, but they did follow, you know, historical fact in many ways. And I could not even tell you how many times I read that whole series of books over and over and over. I just thought it was the most fascinating thing. All through elementary to high school, whenever we were on the medieval times unit in history class, that was my thing. I love it. I love medieval manuscript art. Everything about it I have always loved. I had this one costume as a kid for Halloween one year where I was this medieval queen. It was this medieval queen dress, and to tell you that I wore that thing to absolute rags just to play in, because I wanted to be a medieval princess so bad. Now, did I realize probably that wouldn't have been the most fun? No. There was a fantasy version in my head of what that would have been like, obviously. But right away when I saw this deck, it really reminded me of that younger version of myself that just got so excited to learn about this topic specifically. It just really, really fascinated me. I just loved reading, and I loved reading books that put me into this kind of world. So, it is not the most conventional looking inner child deck by any means, but that's really where it puts me, because I had such a strong love for medieval history, especially as a very young child, for whatever reason. I think a lot of us probably have those topics. Like, I've seen people who call themselves Titanic kids, or as like young children they just learned everything they could about the Titanic. That cracks me up. Anyway, this is my hot chocolate deck, and it is the Golden Tarot of the Renaissance. Next up, we've got the Italian Soda, which is another one. Never heard of that, never had one. Would very much like to, though. So if anyone knows where in the United States I can find this, I'd like one of those. It sounds delightful. But the prompt behind this is a deck that is fun, low-key, and doesn't take itself too seriously, and for me that has to be the Teeny Tiny Tarot. I mean, even right away, just that it's called the Teeny Tiny Tarot. Oh, and we are starting on my number one example of the card that made me think of this. It is the Tower, that is this coffee cup falling off this book pile, and it just says everything you thought you knew. This little deck, it has so many quirks. I think it's so fun. And I don't know, it has such a good feeling when I read to it. It never is giving me some sort of like really heavy reading. It's really like an everyday reader for me. Oh, but what was that noise I just made? Oh my gosh. I meant to say, oh boy. Does anyone else do that? If you are someone who makes videos, or if you just like have to record yourself for any reason, I feel like I'm so hyper aware of just the weird noises I tend to make. Didn't know that I made so many or like said things weird so often, but man, does this make me so aware of that. Not that it's a problem, but you know, it's just funny. What was I saying? Oh, and it's low-key in the sense of there's not so much going on in these images. They're relatively kind of clean looking cards where there's open space. There's nothing superfluous. And there are so many personal nods that Holly Audley is the one who creates this. And for example, this is an illustration of things that are actually hanging in her home, like the way they're hanging. Like apparently this is maybe in the hallway or something. Like this exact flag and picture are in their hallway, and so she just made it the sun card. I just think it's really, really fun. I love the eyeballs and the skulls as cups and needles. It's really just a fun and just really, really clever deck. I mean, every time I bring this out, this is one, I mostly use it whenever I'm traveling, but every time I do bring it out, especially for some kind of video, I'm like, man, I need to just leave this out and just use it all the time because it really is such a favorite, and I love the readings I get with this one. Anyway, this is my Italian soda deck, and that is the Teeny Tiny Tarot. Last but not least, we have the Herbal Tea. And this is a deck that takes it down a notch and really helps you to unwind. And surprise, surprise, we've got out the Northern Animal Tarot. Now, the takes it down a notch part is kind of interesting to me because I don't really feel like this deck takes it down a notch for me in the sense that it doesn't deliver the things it needs to deliver, but I think because I know the deck so well, and I feel like it's the one deck I have that I don't know how to explain it other than I feel like it knows me, like really knows me in ways that I might not even kind of know myself yet. Not to be dramatic, that it doesn't sound like unwinding at all. But I mean that in like a comforting way where whenever I'm pulling cards from this deck, I know immediately what it's saying to me. It's always saying the right things. And it feels very personal. And the imagery, everything about this deck is comforting to me. The way it smells, the cardstock. At this point, it is so softened just because of how much I've shuffled it. I feel like I know the characters in here so well. I know all the images. I know all the card meanings from the guidebook. Like, I know everything about this deck. And a big reason I picked this one too is when I thought about unwinding, this is a deck that it doesn't, by any means, it doesn't live up in my bedroom. Actually, right now, my bedside table deck is the Healing with Fairies by Dorian Virtue, which I did a trade with Allie from Totero for because she thought I would like it, and she was so right. I do love it. But I don't know that one super well yet. So anyway, besides the point, I love to give you all extra details, don't I? I just really do. But often if I'm feeling in need of extra comfort, I will take this deck up to bed with me and just flip through the cards so I can see the pictures before I fall asleep. Like, it's really comforting on that level to me. And again, it's the whole experience of like the feel of the cards being so soft now and the smell of them. Like the ink, it smells just like Crayola crayons, which I love. There's just nothing that's not comforting to me about this deck, which is funny because as I've mentioned many times, every time I use this deck, I get one of the extra cards. Like this, for example. Like, without fail, every single time I use the deck, I get one of the extra cards. And a lot of the times, I get the, like, more shadowy ones. But even those, I'm like, they feel like old friends. I'm like, oh, you again. I know what you mean. It's okay. And I I really do love this deck so much. I do actually have the 3rd edition did just come out. The creator is doing orders in smaller batches just so she can keep up with the shipping. So there will be another, it's not really a pre-order, another order of them going up, I think maybe in a month or so. I would definitely follow the Northern Animal Instagram page and sign up for her newsletter if you were interested. But I do have that 3rd edition coming. I'm very excited to get to see another edition of it, because I did have the 2nd edition, which was really cool to, again, compare and contrast. That one is now just living with my friend Rachel so that she can enjoy some Northern Animal as well. Because when it comes down to it, like, this is my Northern Animal deck, but I mean, any sort of copy I can get of it, I'm gonna want to see, which I do not feel about with many decks. It's pretty much this one. I think the only other one is Coastal Curiosities, but regardless, this is my herbal tea deck. I've gone on long enough, and that is the Northern Animal Tarot, and that is my last one I have to share for today. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. I had so much fun making it and thinking about it, and I can't wait to watch hopefully some more VRs. I feel like since it's got a resurgence, I'm hoping some other people that I haven't seen make it. I think they will, which is exciting because I think I've watched just about all of them that are out there right now, but such a fun idea. So anyway, that being said, I hope you all are having a fantastic beginning to your week, and I'll see you again very soon.